Hey everyone, you're listening to the TEN7 Podcast, where we get together every fortnight, and sometimes more often, to talk about technology, business, and the humans in it. I'm your host, Ivan Stegic. We're starting off the new year with a retrospective. We published 29 episodes last year, which is slightly more than once every 2 weeks, or as we say it here, every fortnight. That's a great deal of content, all of which was created by an amazing team here at TEN7. So let me begin with some thanks. I'd like to thank our transcriptionist, Roxanne, who works tirelessly transcribing the audio for every episode so that we can publish the text online in a timely fashion. Thank you. To Charlene, who edits each of the transcripts and comes up with the summaries, the links, the social media posts. Thank you. And of course, to Jonathan, the producer of the show, who masterfully records, edits, mixes, schedules, uploads, and generally makes my life magically easy to record the show. Thank you too. None of the almost 30 episodes of 2019 would be possible without the three of you. So we're going to look back and play some of our favorite excerpts this year. Before each clip, I'll tell you who the guest is, what episode it came from, and I'll try to set it up with some additional context. And don't worry, today's podcast webpage has links to the episodes, so you can always go back and listen to them all. We started off 2019 with our 50th episode, and who better to have as a guest than the very founder of Drupal himself, Dries Buttert. I asked him about how his role had changed over the years since starting the project and writing the initial code in his dorm room in Belgium.
I think my role has evolved a lot over time. In the early days, I would write 100% of the code, and I would spend a lot of my time building Drupal.org. I would help run the servers behind Drupal.org. I would organize the DrupalCon events or help organize them intensively. And over time, I've scaled more and more, right? Drupal Association would be one example of that as a step in evolving my role, which put in place an entity, a nonprofit entity specifically, that could take over the organization of DrupalCon, which now is, it's a serious event. It costs a few $1 million to put on and takes a whole team of people to organize. Same thing with managing our website and the underlying hardware infrastructure. It's now being managed professionally by people at the Drupal Association and again, also with the help of people in the community, just like DrupalCon. But these are examples of how I've scaled my role. Obviously, on the technical side, I went from being the sort of single core committer to now having, teams of core committers, for each of the major releases, having committees and task force around different aspects of the project, like a technical working group that defines coding standards. We have release managers and product managers and framework managers and all these kinds of roles, to subsystem maintainers that are responsible for different aspects of the of Drupal core. And so these are all examples of me scaling my role over time, and we continue to make governance changes all the time, and to scale the project as needed. I think that's the right thing to do. As projects or organizations get bigger, you need to do you need to put the kind of organizational structure in place. You also need to scale the culture of the project, and so try to help with that through my keynotes. Actually, last year this time I helped write Drupal's values and principles document. That's a way to help scale our culture. So takes a lot of effort and different people to maintain and run the Drupal project today.
After I'd been to the Managed Digital conference, I was enamored with Rob Haar's keynote and his leadership of a company called Sparkbox. His style is squarely focused on all the people that are connected to his company, whether that's current employees, clients, partners, or even former employees. In episode 74, that published in November of 2019, I asked him about this focus. I love the friendly disposition you have and how inviting you are. And it doesn't just extend to clients and partners and current team members. It also extends to Sparkbox alums. When you gave your keynote at Managed Digital, I was really impressed with how you talked about kind of the wider Sparkbox community, not just the people that are working there right now, but people who have worked and humans who have been with you in the past. What's your philosophy around that? And how do you get those people together if you do?
My philosophy around all of this is I got into this for the humans, and I believe that we have to treat them well. I think that your former employees are the ones that actually control your reputation. And I want to make sure that everybody leaves well and things end well for people. I think so much of how people view a relationship, and that's really what employment is defined by how it ends. And a perfectly good, even successful relationship, if it ends poorly, can feel horrible and can color the whole thing. And that's not at all what I want to do. I think that what we look for is for people who, during at least a season, because there's seasons for all things, where our seasons line up and that we can kick a bunch of butt together on projects. And that season will probably end, and that's okay. And I think that's really healthy to kind of think about life that way, that, hey, our goals lined up and we did a bunch of great work together, and now our goals don't. We're going to go our own ways. That doesn't remove you, that person or that alum, from our story. It doesn't take us out of their story. Like, there's a lot of good stuff that happened, and why not respect that by throwing a party on the way out? And I think the other part that just is so fundamental is I can't talk about caring for humans the way that I do and believe what I believe, and then only live that when it benefits me, when they're employees. And I think that's fundamental. If you really care about the people, then it has to transcend when it makes sense, when it's convenient. So I invite people to come in and talk to me about what they want to do next, and I've written letters of recommendation, help people find new jobs when they're current employees. That's all good stuff. And sometimes people grow. Well, all the times we hope people grow. That should be a common thing that we want out of people. And our alums are they're part of our story. And I still talk to them. There is if I end up in a city where there's a Sparkbox alumni and I haven't seen that person in a while, doing dinner or taking them out or just saying thank you is totally commonplace.
Why do you call your company a studio? It's a subtle distinction from being an agency or a firm or a dev shop. I think it's worth explaining and exploring.
Yeah, I hate the word agency because
I do too.
It makes me think of Don Draper with the brown liquor sitting in his office, smoking, and the whole power dynamic that comes with that. And I think that word agency has been overloaded a lot and doesn't make clients think of partnership. It thinks of hey, we're going to throw some work over the wall and it's going to come back and you're going to be our agency of record. It's everywhere. So I like the word studio because I think it speaks better to the creative problem-solving work that we want to do in partnership with our clients. And it invokes the right feeling of that.
Rob was one of the keynote speakers at Manage Digital. That's the annual Project Managers Conference in Minneapolis, put on by our good friend Lynne Winter. She was on the show as part of episode 56 in March. And at that conference, she was giving a mini keynote about burnout. So I asked her about it. She had some wise words to share with us. Let's talk about burnout.
Yeah.
How prevalent do you see that? Do you have any data to show? What have you noticed, and what are you hoping to achieve with your mini note?
Yeah, so in general stats, if you start looking at people across the industry or across, working people, and then specifically across the industry, there's so much pressure and change of environment from like, where is the line between home and work, from working at home or having technology accessible all the time. It's really blurred the line of when do you go home, when do you put things down, when do you turn off, and it's becoming a problem. And, honestly, this talk came out of my own personal challenges with burnout. But as I started talking about it with people, I heard these stories over and over and over. I'd be speaking at conferences and people would talk to me about how do you deal with this and how do you deal with that? And it was all about boundaries and all about, taking ownership of the path that you actually want to go on versus letting the path take you. And I think it's a thing that PMs deal with more in this industry because of maybe the role and how it's often positioned at agencies. So what I mean by that is a lot of times it's not as valued as a developer, for instance. Like when you're going to hire, we can get any old PM. They don't really need to be a PM. They can be anyone. They can do that. They're just scheduling meetings. But to hire a developer, we'll get a recruiter and it's going to be harder. And it's hard for different reasons to hire different roles. But there's just oftentimes that situation set up or less responsibility or value placed on it. Some PMs aren't even allowed to talk to clients. They have to go through account managers. They're not given the responsibility or the value in that role. And so there's some positioning at certain places. And then there's also that impact of like how you personally come to your role. And for me, I personally have an issue, balancing like don't take on too much and, it's stop running in the hamster wheel kind of situation. So I had a kind of a career change back in 2017, and I've been really trying to force myself to step back and try to realign what are my goals in my career and what are my personal goals and things like that. And so since I've started talking to people about it, I've gotten, honestly, a lot of feedback that has been positive as well as a lot of sad stories. So it's something we need to talk about.
In episode 66, from the end of July, I talked to Jeff Archibald, CEO of Paperleaf, about 2 articles he wrote, one about the false hustle and the other about the 60-hour work week. I asked him about what motivated him to write them. It segues from or into this article you wrote on Fast Company about the false hustle. Right, how keeping busy is just a way of not getting things done. Right. And you've also written about humble bragging about a 60-hour work week is actually symptomatic of larger problems that you might have as a company. And I've talked to Lynne Winter in a previous episode about burnout, and it just seems to come up more and more. Like we are trying to be cognizant of what we're doing, of what our employees are doing, so that we're not detrimental to our own mental health, and so that we're happy in the work we do, so that we have careful focus in work and life and home. And so the question is, what motivated you to write those 2 articles, the false hustle one and the one about the 60-hour work week?
The 60-hour work week one was just kind of it was a bit of a direct response to, I don't know, what I was exposed to, and what I'm sure virtually every listener and yourself has been exposed to as well through social media. And it just is that that humble bragging, right? Like, oh man, crazy week. Like finally shutting the laptop down. It's 10 p.m. on Friday. And it's indirectly talking about how, important we are. And I'm totally guilty of this in the past as well, how important we are and how busy we are and how successful we are. But in reality, like, that's not sustainable. It's symptomatic of not having enough process in place, or not having enough revenue coming in, or just symptomatic of a host of potential flaws with the business model. So instead of bragging about it, like, it'd be great if we were bragging about like how everybody at our shop worked a 25-hour work week and I was super stoked, and we're hitting 30% profit margins and everyone's getting paid properly. Like that. Those are the things we should be bragging about. And I get that at the start of, especially when you're starting a business, a startup or an agency or whatever, there is an inordinate amount of time that needs to be put in to kind of get to the point where you have enough clients and you can support bringing on somebody to help ease that workload. I understand that. But if it's continually what we're touting as success, then I think we have it totally backwards. And the false hustle article, that was more just like I suppose a moment of self-awareness for myself, where I'm a productive person. I can get a lot of stuff done very quickly, but I have a tendency to overvalue the volume of tasks I complete versus the importance of those tasks. So, I could sit down and crank out 12 things in a day, but did it actually move the needle anywhere? Like, I was working really hard and I was being really busy, but it's the equivalent on some level of in that article, the analogy I drew to like Sammy Sosa sprinting from the dugout to the outfield in between innings, but then jogging after a fly ball. It's the same kind of thing. And so like for me, I just wrote that more to remind myself that I need to make sure to understand what I really need to be working on, what's truly important. And apply tools like the Eisenhower matrix to understand what needs to be done now versus what can be delegated, and plan my week out a little bit better, or else you can get to the end of the week and think that you moved the needle because you did a lot of stuff, but it doesn't actually mean you have moved the needle.
How do you keep yourself on track for that? It sounds like a great idealistic way of living, and I would love to do it myself, but how do I actually do it? How do you do it?
It's relatively straightforward, to be honest. It's I suppose a series of processes. So we use OKRs here, so objectives and key results. So I set 1 or 2 objectives for sales and marketing, which is primarily my focus here for every quarter, and then I list out the key results. If you're a listener and you're wondering what that means, just Google OKRs and you'll find a whole bunch of really interesting methods and information about it. But I set out those key results, and those are the things I really try to focus on. Those are the things that are going to move the needle. So I map those out. So if I have an objective to increase revenue for the next quarter, then some of my key results might be, pitch 3 new projects every month. It might be bid on $1.5 million of work. Just kind of key results like that. So that's kind of where I start. And then at the start of every week, I have a reminder in my calendar and about a 30-minute window to actually plan and block out my week. And it says right in there, like, review your OKRs, figure out what you should be working on. And then I'll go through my calendar and I'll see what time I have available, that hasn't been booked for meetings or whatever else. And I'll block in time to focus on, like this particular sales objective or this key result, or, this particular proposal that I know is due by the end of the week. So for me, those OKRs ultimately are making sure I'm working on the really, really important stuff that'll move the needle. And then that weekly calendar reminder and the subsequent kind of blocking out of my time on a weekly basis is how I make sure that stuff actually gets done.
How many companies have you worked for that have gone to the trouble of figuring out your own personal love language? Well, Alison and Chad Paris, who both run Paris Leaf, were my guests in episode 67. And in this clip, Alison talks about their company's values: gratitude, responsibility, integrity, candor, and excellence. Ali, what is G-RICE?
Gere stands for our 5 values. And I do want to expand on that a little bit, what Chad was saying, because I think it's important to talk about using your purpose and ambition statement and also your core values to make strategic hiring and, sadly, firing decisions. I think by evolving our core kind of brand messaging and really owning it and metabolizing it for ourselves, it strengthened our ability to make really strategic decisions about who we bring on our team. And as a result, the conversations are so much easier. Making decisions as a collective are so much easier because we just bounce it off of our values, which are gratitude, responsibility, integrity, candor, and excellence. So that's where the G-RICE comes from.
How do you know when you're not living up to those standards, and who's policing them?
Oh, I think we're quite self-policing team. I think we're very open with one another, and we really turn to one another to hold each other accountable. So if we feel like one another is kind of out of line with our values, we're very quick to bring that up in a really kind and empowered way. So there's not necessarily one person with the policing badge on, making sure we're having these as our core values. It's really, I think it's somewhat easy, and I'll knock on wood as I'm saying it. It's easy when you hire and fire for your core values, because the teammates who are ultimately on your team end up embodying those values. So it's not as much of a policing as it is like we're a team doing this together.
I met Carl Smith at Owner Camp in Bend, Oregon in the spring. I went to this Bureau of Digital event not knowing anyone, but came home feeling like I had a new, intimate set of friends and peers I could talk to. In episode 63, I asked Carl how he planned to scale this wonderful thing he was in charge of. So I'm going to ask you what your daughter asked. How do you scale that good feeling? How do you make it even bigger?
It's tough, right? Because in a way, you're scaling intimacy. And Lori Gold Patterson said that to me. Lori Gold Patterson runs Pixo out of Urbana, Illinois. And we were at Owner Summit in San Diego a few years back. And she came up to me. She goes, "You got a huge challenge." And I was like, "What is it?" And she goes, "How do you scale intimacy?" She was like, "Most of these people know each other because they met, but there are going to be so many people who want in, and you're not going to be able to do events for everybody and all this sort of stuff." So now the goal is to find ways to do more stuff online in smaller groups, to have opportunities for people who have met in person to reconnect, and for us to be the facilitator and the organizer and handle the logistics of that. Because we can do so much more online that as long as there is some level of in-person connection once a year, maybe twice a year, then the online supplements really well. So that's a lot of it. We can't just have events get bigger, and we can't just put on more events. It's going to have to be finding ways, using the means that we have, and a lot of it's technology, to make sure that everybody's feeling connected more frequently. And even voice over just, pixels, right? Even just like you said, it's so good to hear your voice.
Right.
So having that happen. So we're working on an idea called Bureau Circles. We'll see how it could play out. We don't want to overcommit and then blow it. But the idea of 8 to 10 people that we help coordinate that get together once a month, it's kind of like an EO. It's kind of like a mastermind. But it's super focused on what they do and their role. We call them roll calls in the past when there are more people. But this idea of getting it down to a smaller group that is there for each other all the time. And one of the things, Yvonne, that spurred this was we have a BizDev camp. We have so many camps, dude. I can't even remember them to list them. But BizDev camp, everybody said, don't do it. Nobody's going to share. Nobody's going to be willing to share. And we said it when we brought people in. And the thing was, it sold out with like 7 on the waiting list. And I told him, I was like, we're going to have an optional show and tell on the final day where if you show up, you have to show. You have to show your pitch deck, or you have to show a presentation, or you have to show something. But what was amazing was when we left that first BizDev camp, monthly calls started. It was just hilarious. They started their own monthly call, and they called it an accountability call. And it is just unbelievable. And so that in a lot of ways, that's become the model for us as we're looking at how do we move forward to scale the intimacy. People have said, compared to AIGA or things like this, I like the grassroots feel. And I like the idea that in those circles, there is somebody who connects with us, but they're also at liberty to make sure that they're doing what the group needs so that we're continuing to support, but we don't have to participate in every single thing.
In 2019, TEN7 started to purchase renewable energy certificates called RECs and water restoration credits called WRCs for every full-time employee. It's our way of trying to offset the carbon footprint that the company creates by being in business. In February, for episode 53, Heather Schrock from the Bonneville Environmental Foundation joined me on the show. In this clip, she talks about the projects they're involved in and how they come about.
So I'll just start with water because that is, again, our more in-house piece, because the water projects that we support are all directly, if we're going to create WRCs, it's from a project that we as an organization personally support and are putting some energy behind. Whereas with offsets and RECs, we're on the retailer side of that relationship. So we do vet and choose the projects carefully. We always work with, for RECs, there's a Greenie is the certification for RECs, and then for offsets there's several certifications, but we work mainly with 4 or 5 of them, third-party verifiers, and we just like to have a nice array of those projects that we think people would be interested in. Currently in our offset portfolio, we have various things from landfill gas to forestry projects. We have an interesting marine project that makes marine shipping vessels more efficient and also protects some of the sea life. So always some interesting stuff there. But the water projects, there's actually, and I'll send you this link later, we have a project bank on our businessforwater.org website. So we have a separate website that we send people to that really specifically talks about our water stewardship business engagements. And there's a project bank which we started because we were finding with water projects it was getting a little more difficult. Whereas with carbon offsets and RECs, there's almost an infinite supply. But with water projects, it's a little more difficult to match the needs of the funder or the person who wants to buy those water WRCs or buy that invest in that type of water project. Trying to match make between the funder and the project can be quite difficult, trying to get something in their region, something where they have an impact, something that aligns with their goals and their ideals around what a water stewardship project should look like. So we started this project bank, and there's now several, dozens maybe on here, water projects that are in various stages of development. So some of them are done, some of them are in the middle, some of them still need funding, have funding gaps, but there's some great, if you go to that link, which again I'll send you later, you can see examples of all these amazing water projects. And again, we started this bank so that we could solicit water projects from other organizations who have projects that need funding, and then so we can come in and help matchmake the funders to these projects.
That's wonderful. That's businessforwater.org, and we'll link to that in the transcript on our website. Is there one particular project that sticks out for you? Do you have a favorite?
A favorite water project? Oh gosh, there's some really cool ones. So most of our water projects historically have been very much your traditional type water leasing type projects where we're buying water leasing rights to keep the water in stream instead of having it all go to irrigation. Those are very, very common types of water restoration projects, irrigation upgrades, things like that. We've recently branched out into more urban and green infrastructure type projects. So there's one that we're undertaking in Los Angeles, which is a green infrastructure project that's a collaboration with Los Angeles City Council and there's a neighborhood association and also an organization called Heal the Bay. And we're all working together to create this park that will have also an impact on the neighborhood. It will be a safe place for people to play and to move, and there'll be fitness stations. But the park itself will serve as a water quality improvement project in the Los Angeles River watershed. So that's really exciting that we're going to be able to save hundreds of gallons of potable water that will serve this neighborhood, but also creating this safe and fun space for them to interact with. It's turning what was just a block that had nothing on it, that was just, not a safe place to be, into something that will be a neighborhood gathering spot.
When Hans Bjordal, CEO of Culture Foundry, attended a talk on conscious capitalism at South by Southwest, little did he know it would make him question everything he'd been taught about doing business. You can't just tack conscious capitalism onto a company. It must be baked into the leadership. In this clip from episode 64, I've asked Hans to give us a definition of conscious capitalism. Listen.
So conscious capitalism is a model that seeks to unlock the potential for social good and humanistic good in business, and not just do that as a feel-good, let's have a corporate giving program when we're done counting our money, but baking that concept right into the core of your company and doing it in a structured way that actually yields better financial results at the end of the day. And that, when I was first exposed to this system, I was at South by Southwest. John Mackey, who is one of the founders of this organization and early champions and ongoing champion, was giving a talk about a book he wrote called Conscious Capitalism. And I'm like, this is interesting. It's a fairly aggressive assertion that the way we've been doing business in this country is wrong, and that we need to evolve it to, fit this different and frankly a more difficult model of how business should work, that it's not just profit and loss, that it's things about core purpose and things about stakeholder orientation, conscious culture, conscious leadership, that these things can be defined, that they can be to some degree quantified, and that they can, through research, be shown to return not just incremental better return on investment, but exponential better return on investment. And, the research around it, I think, is still emerging, still evolving. The ideas, have really caught fire because the hunger for this in business is acute, right? And everywhere I come across it, people who feel they have to have one person at home and bring a different person to work, that they can't integrate who they are with what they do. That's a fundamentally unhealthy place to be, and creating business environments where you can bring your entire genuine self to work and do that, hopefully, where there's some social good that comes out of that. That's a very compelling thing. And that idea has been around a long time, but it hasn't been super structured. Now it's getting more structured, and it's getting more structured through conscious capitalism, through B corporations, through some of the work that Nick Hanauer is doing. He's a Seattle billionaire who's making a very aggressive run at redefining what successful economics look like. So a lot of people are approaching this idea from slightly different directions. Conscious capitalism was my introduction into that approach to business. And, some of those tenets from the book, I picked up directly and plugged them right into Culture Foundry. And so it's been very useful to us in terms of how we want Culture Foundry to be. But I also think there's an imperative worldwide. I won't even stop at the at the borders of the U.S., but worldwide, to really think about business in this way and very aggressively counter the traditional model that you only have an obligation to your shareholders and everyone else can take a hike, right? Everything else is a commodity. This model is a broader stakeholder model where you need to accommodate clients, employees, partners, environment, community, and shareholders. But this is, we're going to slice this pie up many different ways, not just give everything to the shareholders and leave everyone else holding the bag.
In my head, Jeff Geerling is the pie dramble guy. So getting a chance to sit down with him and talk about Raspberry Pis and how he's automated them and clustered them and bent them to his will was a lot of fun for me. In addition to being a lover of software and all things open source, he's also an author. In episode 77, I asked him about his latest book and what he's currently working on. Now, in addition to all the hobbies you have, side projects and so on, you are also an author. And I would love to hear about your latest book and the book that you've written on Kubernetes. What are you working on right now?
Yeah, so I love writing. I don't know how many million words I've written in my life on my blog and on other blogs and things. But I love writing. And in 2013 or so, I think that was when I started. I've always wanted to write a book my whole life. I'm like, I want to write a book sometime. I think part of that was jealousy because my brother, when he was a kid, wrote a book, and his book, the 15 Minutes of Fame, his book caught fire and was a local, very popular book. He sold maybe 15,000 copies or something. It was pretty cool, being the little brother to the brother who wrote that cool book. But I was also a little jealous, I want to do that too. So, but I also just love writing. I've always loved English and literature growing up, and I love reading and I love writing. So that I put that together with the fact that Ansible didn't have a book in 2014 when I started with in 2013, but in 2014 I'm like, there's still no book for Ansible, and it's really popular. So I decided to start writing it with a goal that I would write 100 pages and sell 200 copies. And it was funny because I started writing it on a platform called LeanPub, where you can publish it while you're writing it and sell it while you're writing it. And by the time I had written about 40 pages, I already had sold 200 copies. And then, fast forward these many years later, it's 2019. So it's been in print for 5 years now. And I now sell it on Amazon and other places. And it's called Ansible for DevOps. And that book has sold over 22,000 copies, and it's now 480-something pages, including a chapter on Kubernetes and a chapter on Docker, and a couple examples that do Drupal, one of them inspired by the Raspberry Pi Dramble cluster. So that was my first book effort, and it went incredibly well, and I was floored. There's no word to describe when you're I want to do this thing my whole life, and this is my goal, and then your goal is surpassed by 50 times over, and you get to meet awesome people because of it, and it's just so many cool things happen because of that book. It also helped us in my family. We've wanted to remodel our kitchen, and after writing the book and making some profit off of it, I was able to remodel the kitchen 4 years earlier than we thought we might be able to. So, that's a huge change for our life, because our old kitchen was kind of hard with 3 kids and the way that we live our life and stuff at home, especially since I work remote and I'm at home all the time. It was, we had an old cramped little kitchen, and we were able to get it better. So the book was just awesome. I don't expect to have the same level of success, but who knows? You never know where it's going to lead. But I'm working on another book. I actually just finished the first chapter a few nights ago, and I have a structure for the rest of it, and I'm working on examples and chapters. The next book is going to be called Ansible for Kubernetes, and maybe if Ansible's still around in 5 years and there's another game-changing cloud infrastructure thing, it'll be Ansible for that, and I'll have a whole series out. But I'm working on that book, and I haven't published it yet. I probably will pretty soon. Even though it's not finished, I'll publish in progress updates on LeanPub. But both of those books, if you go to Ansible for DevOps, all spelled out, or Ansible for Kubernetes.com, those are the book sites. And I love writing them. And one of the best things about writing them in progress is for both books, I've had a lot of interaction with the people who read it, and they can help me to, like, if they're interested in something, I can write about that. Or if they are like, your example didn't work on my computer, I can improve it before I actually make a published printed version that people will buy.
As some of you may know, I grew up in South Africa, only to immigrate to the United States at the turn of the millennium. As a result, my childhood friends are South African, and I was able to interview at least one of them for the show. Gareth van Onselen is a South African journalist, political analyst, and author who joined me for episode 78, right at the end of the year. We try to stay clear from politics, but in this episode, I was all in. We mostly talked about South African politics, but in this clip, Gareth talks about former South African President Jacob Zuma and the parallels to politics in the United States. I'm glad now that I didn't read it back in 2014, because I don't think I would have appreciated it as much as I do now. And mostly it shocks me. It just shocks me how much of a parallel there is between Zuma and the current president here in the United States. And at some points I was reading the book and I wasn't sure if I was reading something that was directed at Zuma or something that was directed at Trump. And there's this one place in the book where you say, he can fill a vacuum with empty rhetoric, but once it is all done, you're left wondering whether he has said anything at all. And then you also go on to describe him as something of an ethical black hole. How did such a man become elected? Not once, but twice.
I would agree with you 100%. I think Jacob Zuma's tenure is a brilliant template for what's happening in the US with Donald Trump. I think they are very similar in a lot of key respects, not just in terms of the way in which they use or abuse popular sentiment to serve what is essentially an entirely personal political agenda, but in terms of the grand narrative of their entire tenure in office and how these kind of demagogues tend to affect the way in which society responds to them. I mean, what actually happened with Jacob Zuma, and I think it's not absolute, but in a lot of ways very similar, is happening in the United States, is essentially you get elected on a wave of popular appeal, which takes various different forms and has various different causes, but that's the outcome. There's some kind of populist zeitgeist that manifests, and you're swept along by it if you're this demagogic leader. There's then a process of the shattering of the illusion. And that shattering doesn't happen to the opposition, who never had any doubt as to your unsuitability for office. It happens to sections of your own support base. The nature of public office starts to reveal who you are, the demands of making hard, often neutral and magnanimous decisions, which you're kind of incapable of doing because you're demagogic and biased in a certain way, start to reveal your true character. Then there's some fundamental problem, either a case of corruption or unethical behavior, onto which your opponents then latch as a means to remove you from office. And it becomes a defining battleground along that particular issue. In the case of Jacob Zuma, it was his homestead in Kundla, this abuse of taxpayers' money. In the case of Trump, well, it's, Russia and impeachment and the various things that go about it, but that becomes the mobilizing point. You then suck in all of civil society and all independent institutions to help you deliver the outcome you want, the judiciary and so on and so forth. And how that plays out is yet to be known in the US, but that's the way in which the narrative tends to unfold. And as I'm saying all of this, I'm realizing I'm going slightly sideways from the original question you asked me. But
no, please keep going. Yeah.
A bit detracted there. But that was just, you triggered a thought with regards to the overlap between the two. And I think Jacob Zuma is a real case study for Democrats and conservatives in the US to look at, because the narrative is playing out in hugely similar ways on a lot of different levels.
That's it for 2019. Thank you for listening to our little podcast. We're so glad that you join us as often as you do. We've got more in store for you this year, and hope you'll join us as we continue to talk to interesting people from around the world. If you have a second, send us a message and tell us what you would like to hear in the coming year. Or just send an email to say hi. Our email address is podcast@ten7.com. Until next time, this is Ivan Stegic. Thank you for listening.